Hey fearsome friends, the ghosts and ghouls are out tonight, so stay tightly tucked under your bed sheets and blankets, get cozy comfy warm, because it's time to let your nightmares in. So ever since I was a kid, my mum has told me my family has a history of being able to see ghosts. Well, I think I drew the short end of the stick. Because ever since I was a kid, I've always felt like I've had something attached to me. I've moved around a fair bit as a child, and no matter where I've lived, I've always experienced the paranormal. Lights going on and off, doors slamming, seeing shadow people. And I even once described my stepfather's dad, even though he died years before I was a thought of being conceived. Fast forward to my adult life though, and it hasn't changed at all. I now have a family of my own, and my kids have seen things too. But what's really interesting about all this is now people who visit my home are also seeing things as well. For example, I was home alone whilst the wife was at work and the kids were at school, and I was doing the normal house things, cleaning up a bit and also taking time out to game once all was said and done. I went off to the kitchen to grab a drink, and in my son's room, which is towards the front of the house and also adjacent to the kitchen, I saw a little boy in overalls just standing there. He didn't acknowledge me and didn't move. He just stood there. I knew he was an entity because he was wearing a jumper with a button-down shirt, and he was literally grey in colour all over, him and his clothes. Shrugging it off as it wasn't the first time I'd seen a spirit, I got my drink, and when I walked past again, he was gone. Fast forward 2 days later, when I invited my cousin and his fiancée over for dinner with me and my wife, and it was fairly uneventful. That is, until they were getting ready to leave. My cousin's fiancée asked to use the restroom, so I pointed her in the right direction, which is directly next to my son's room, who wasn't home as we'd gotten my mother to watch the kids for the night. She then came back from the restroom and asked, "Who's that little boy in the bedroom just sitting on the bed? I thought your kids weren't here." To which I replied that they weren't, and her face immediately went a bit pale. She walked back to my son's room, then came running back into the kitchen, saying he was gone. Now by that point I hadn't told anyone, not even my wife, about what I'd seen. But my cousin's fiancé described the little boy I had seen perfectly, clothes and all. I then told her of my experience. Needless to say, dinner was cut short, and a week after that I was lying in bed with my wife, when I began to feel a burning sensation on my back. I told my wife to see if she could see anything on my back, and what she found was 3 distinct claw-looking scratches going down it. They were red and clearly visible, even on my skin as I'm African American. That wasn't the first time I've had those marks either, but I've only ever woken up to them, and that was the first time I felt it happen with me being awake. This has happened at least 10 times over the years. So what do you guys think? Is it me that's haunted? So a few people have been asking me to share my story, and while there is no perfect time to tell it, I would love to be able to help anyone else along their journey through the cosmos and understand the afterlife, even if I can just help one person. I was born on October the 6th in 1982 with croup, which is an infection of the upper airway that obstructs breathing and causes a characteristic barking cough. And back before medicine had advanced, it would tragically cause SIDS in babies. This was my first experience with death, and while I feel as though I remember it vividly, I can't tell whether it was just my imagination, so I won't speak on it further. However, since I was a little child, I've had visions, and the only way I can describe them are that I'm in a cave that has ancient writing on the walls. There's a stick figure with a sort of speech cloud-looking drawing coming from their mouth, and then to another more evolved human, and so on, until it reaches modern times. Every so often this vision will randomly flash into my subconscious, and I never really knew what it was until a few years ago. To give you a little background as to what kind of person I am, in junior high, I read that if you put 10,000 hours into a craft, you will master it. So I chose to master music, the future, and people. And from that day, I consciously and avidly put time into studying these three things, creating timelines for any experience I would face. Fast forward to 1995, when I was diagnosed with scarlet fever, which if misdiagnosed leads to more respiratory illnesses, and I remember going in and out of consciousness, but the only visions I saw were the cave drawings. Moving then to New Year's Day in 2010, when I was in a plane crash. I watched the plane go down with all the passengers on the jet screaming bloody murder, and I lost consciousness. When I came to, the plane had landed in Las Vegas, and everyone had this bewildered look on their face, as if to say, did that really happen? The whole event happened in an instant, like a pop. But there are no documents or history of this flight, so I can't speak further on that either. Following that trip, everything changed for me. I began to see spirits more vividly, and I could read people much clearer, even predict actions from other humans. And this is when I started my deep journey with death and studying everything to do with it. I became obsessed and started seeing many future events in advance of them happening, like plagues, riots, war and sickness, and I just knew it was all coming. Everyone began calling me a doomsday prophet, but I knew in my heart these things were true. In 2013, I moved into my best friend Mallory's house in Santa Barbara, who was a devout atheist, and the first week in, as we were watching Jeopardy, a question about death came up. Mallory asked me, "Where do you think we go when we die?" I paused, thought about it, then said, "I have no idea, but I do believe there's no conscious transition between life and death, so we either live forever or we're already dead." She turned off the TV, looked at me and said confused, "Wait, what the hell did you just say? Explain, please." My theory was that of a drunken blackout. The time you are blacked out only exists to the people around you. You only remember right before the blackout and the moment you come back from it. From that day forward, her awareness and thoughts on death elevated drastically, and a seed was planted. She questioned her own belief that we just cease to exist when we die, and it became the basis of our conversations for the next year. There was one specific moment, though, that stood out during these conversations that shook me. She would always look me in the eye and say, "When it happens, you know what to do. I need you to pull the plug." This became a weekly occurrence, and it got to a point so dark that our other friends would shy away when they knew it was coming, and it would just be me and her. We spoke about how she would die, and jokingly she would say, "The Illuminati is going to kill me," and we'd laugh. We spoke about what I was going to say at her funeral. Her name was Mallory Ray Dies, so I suggested we start a charity for her called Mallory Ray Lives after she was gone. December 6th, 2013 would prove to be one of the worst days of my life. Mallory was struck and killed walking across the street by a drunk driver, and she flew over 30 feet in the air, which caused severe brain trauma. She fought for a week but couldn't recover, and sadly passed away. It devastated the whole town, as she was very loved within the community, and over 50 people waited in that hospital for her to recover, until it was time to pull the plug. The person driving the car that hit her was an assistant to the CA representative, Lois Capps, and soon after, their cabinet attempted to fix the charges behind the scenes to help him get off free. But thankfully all the text messages and emails were hacked, and we found out the truth. Since that day, we have started a non-profit called Vol.20, which teaches people that if they are going to party, they must plan ahead first. From 2013 to 2018, there were no fatalities due to drink driving in Santa Barbara because of it, and if you're interested, her Facebook page is Mallory Ray Lives. As you can guess, this whole experience awoke something in me that was already there, whilst dealing with death. So we now move to February 23rd, 2018, when my friend Julie Scon set me up with a spirit guide phone session with a woman called Ellie Molina, who I call the Oracle, because she doesn't tell you the future, but guides you to trust what you already know, so you can make the right choices. This call began typically with her telling me that my aura is purple, etc., etc., and I honestly thought it was a joke. Until halfway through, however, when she stopped, breathed, and told me, "Okay, I need you to write this down. This is important. I see the number 2. 2 years is very important," she continued. "I see you being isolated from your friends and loved ones, and all of them are upset because they don't understand why you can't be near them. You have to ignore it though, because you already know this is the time you need to fulfill your purpose." Then she went on to tell me I would create a language between this world and the next, and I must trust my subconscious, because no one else can see or understand what I see. As you can imagine, I was absolutely stunned, as no one could have known the visions I've been having since I was a little baby, as I've never spoken about it to anyone. And it was all so clear to me. This is my purpose. From that day I moved out of my house, got sober, and started my plan for the next 2 years. I didn't care if what the spirit guide had told me was real or not. All that mattered was that I believed it. Every moment of every hour of every day was spent preparing my subconscious to be isolated, packing it to the brim with what I thought were the right things I needed to bring with me. May 29th, 2018, renewed the worst day of my life. In this dimension anyway. When I accidentally took some nausea medication that I didn't know would throw me into instant anaphylaxis. First my jaw clenched up, then my throat closed, and I was so confused as to what was happening, I didn't know what to do. I was all alone in my house. My phone wasn't working, and I was puking up blood with every minuscule breath I could take, not being able to move. This went on for hours. So long, in fact, that the pain had gone, and I asked myself, when do I die? After what seemed like a lifetime, I eventually passed out, then woke up again about 2 hours later, only to still be choking and not able to move. I passed out again, and it was during this near-death experience that I saw my life flash before my eyes. While it was amazing going through that journey with the knowledge that I have now, I was still in pain, as my body was still suffering. Once I reached the other side, that's when they asked me 3 times to come back, and twice I said no. But on the last time I was asked, if you could come back knowing what you know now, would you? And I said yes. Then I woke up the following morning at 11 a.m. as if nothing had happened. My phone was working, and I texted a co-worker to tell her about my allergic reaction. Then it was at that moment the anaphylaxis came back. I asked her to rush me to hospital, and she came as fast as she could, saying I wasn't breathing during the whole 10-minute trip. The ER then calmly shot me with the EpiPen, and one of the doctors, bewildered, literally looked at me and said, "How are you still alive?" From that moment on, it was as if I was in the Matrix. I could feel everyone, and with Megan, who took me to the ER, we seemingly absorbed each other's subconscious, and now are connected in a way you wouldn't believe. I knew my time was running short though. From the 2-year warning I'd received from Ellie, I jumped into overdrive. And as we got closer to the 2-year mark, my conversations got darker and darker, and I became ill with kidney and heart failure, due to not taking proper time to recover from the anaphylaxis. More and more I would hear people say, "Oh, here he goes," and "I wish Fun Matty was here." By December 2019, my body wasn't retaining water correctly, and I started having TIAs, transient ischemic attacks, almost weekly, which is a major warning sign a stroke is coming. I went to get checked out, and they told me that if I don't repair the damage soon, I could get an infection, amongst other things, and die. At this point, I was so physically ill that my friends were trying to help me with insurance. They could all see I didn't look well, and I had to hear about it constantly. I finally got my Medicare, which was supposed to begin on the 1st of February 2020. But then 3 days later, I caught COVID, and I remember lying in my bed, once again alone, thinking to myself, I'm going to die. Each breath took every ounce of energy out of me, and I knew this was it. As it reached 2 a.m., I remember thinking, if it's still this bad when I wake up, I must go straight to ER in the morning. But I didn't wake up the next morning. I remained unconscious for nearly 3 days. No one knew where I was, so no one checked in on me. And when I regained consciousness, I had suffered a stroke in the right side of my brain, which had caused the left side of my body to become paralyzed, along with major organ damage. As I woke up and started realizing what was going on, the whole nation was in a panic, and the media was saying that if you go to the hospital, you will get COVID again. This was at the point where no one knew anything about COVID, and all we saw on the news were people dying. So I sat there, to die alone. This next part of the story is my personal account of everything I'd experienced while I was gone. It was in an instant that I woke up on the other side, and I immediately knew I was dead. It was the scariest moment of my life, knowing this was the place I would be for the rest of eternity. Imagine waking up on the dark side of the moon, floating nowhere in the tragic unknown alone, in a sea of your own subconscious. Now remove the moon, then the earth, then the stars. You are now in a shell or bubble floating in space with nothing for millions of light years but you, and the consciousness of everyone who's ever existed in the history of time and space. You know they exist, but you can't see or hear them. You just be, and everyone is at peace. All my pain was gone, and I had no limbs. Then once I'd realized that, the most euphoric feeling overtook my whole being, and there was just no way to describe it. It was maybe like 1 billion orgasms all at once, and all over my body. This place was much more clear than Earth, as Earth feels like a dream knowing there is a hub of peaceful exuberance existing in the cosmos. After existing there for billions of lifetimes, I then can only imagine I was coming back to Earth, so inevitably the questions came. The first voice said, "Come back, they need you." At this point I saw every war I could remember, from biblical times to cavemen, Renaissance, WW2, and finally I saw 2020. Riots, World War III with destruction and nukes, and I saw plagues, living them and absorbing every moment until everything stopped and I responded, no. Another voice then spoke. "Come back, we need you." This time I saw my friends and loved ones, every person I'd ever encountered in my life, and I got to live their story. I experienced the childhoods of bullies who picked on me and saw how they were abused, and I felt every single touch, and it was terrifying. I saw all my friends begging me to come back because they missed me and needed and loved me. But again I answered no. Before the third voice spoke to me, I was at full peace. I had melodies in my head, and I could see them floating above, around, and inside of me. I could see what was similar to the aurora borealis in the cosmos, and it was beautiful. This went on for billions of years, as time doesn't exist here, until the third voice spoke. The third voice said, "Come back, I need you." It was at this point I realized who it was, and it had been me all along, telling me I still had work to finish in this world before I go. I then looked to my right and saw the light. It was about a football field's distance away, and I knew it was time for me to go. I slowly glided my way over to it, and as it got brighter I knew it was a door slightly opened. I glided closer, until I reached the door and saw to the right was a crowd in an arena, all waiting for the show to start. To the left was the band, and they were all looking at me dead in the eyes. Then the lead singer looked at me and said, "Are you ready to fulfill your purpose?" Then I floated over to the empty drum set and stood there looking amongst the crowd. I then picked up the sticks and the crowd erupted with applause. It was at this moment when I sat down that I woke up. When I returned to Earth, we were in mid-pandemic, and I could barely move because of the stroke and long-hauler symptoms. Soon after, they'd shut down Earth. It was on the 14th of March 2020, and on that day I had a Facebook memory pop up from 2015, which I had tagged about 30 people, saying, 14th of March 2015, 9 hours, 26 minutes, 53 seconds. The world will end. Celebrate your final day on Earth. This kicked off a series of events where my predictions started coming to pass, and you can guess people were a bit freaked out by it. But now people are beginning to believe I'm not just a crazy person saying random things, and more people are paying attention. After this moment, I got to work, and I knew I had a short period of time to recover before everyone would start losing patience with my absence. Everyone was locked in their houses freaking out, so I knew I had a choice. I could scare everyone further by telling them my current health status, or just wait until everything opened up again and tell people face to face what I was going through, as there was nothing anyone could do to help me at this point. I just didn't want to create more panic. Everything was fine and everyone understood that I was really ill and needed time to recover before I went anywhere or saw anyone. And I told them some of my symptoms, but not that I'd had a stroke. I only told 3 close friends about that. On May 26, 2020, after my anaphylaxis shock in 2018, I started writing down all the important dates I had and consciously sent them a year back on Facebook to my past self. I know it sounds insane, but you really should try it. Even if it doesn't work, you literally have nothing to lose. In this case, though, it really worked. I sent a message out to a few of my friends, telling them that May 26th is an important date, and I didn't know why, but I was getting a strong feeling about it, so I warned them to all be aware. They always thanked me and trusted me, as they've seen things happen before. Well, this date happened to be the day after the George Floyd killing, and that's when the timeline became very divided. By this point, it had seemed that everyone had grown tired of me telling them I was still recovering, and the energy around me became extremely dark. One by one, my friends attacked me in ways I will never understand, but I had to believe it was because they were missing me. This was all over a span of 3 weeks, and threw me into a deep depression. With the race war going on, and being the only black family in my neighborhood, I began to see the neighbors' energy take a dark turn. One night, a man with a shaved head walked right past my house with a shotgun, and I knew we weren't safe. There are pieces of this story I have to withhold for legal reasons, but I found a way to protect my house with a firearm. For the whole month of June, I sat on the roof waiting for someone to hurt us. Night after night, I sat there, wondering when they were coming and feeling very depressed at the same time. I would imagine how easy it would be to end it all and go back to that amazing place where there's no racism, no anger, and no pain or suffering. The time came, though, where I was so depressed that I decided this was it. I'm going for it. And I put the gun to my head. As the gun cocked, though, the bullet jammed, and I knew from that moment it was not the right time or my decision to make. Not long after this, my friend Julie Scone, the lady who set me up with Ellie the spiritual guide, reached out to me as she could tell I was in a dark place. She gave me the pep talk of a lifetime and told me I hadn't fulfilled my purpose yet, so I can't give up. She's a spiritual healer who deals with trauma and conducts meditations, and told me that she needed music for them. She wanted me to play piano for her. Now, I didn't have money for a keyboard, so I said to myself that in order to fulfill my purpose, this is what I need. Then not soon after, the money almost magically arrived in my account. I then shut myself off from the world and sat down there rehearsing and putting together the melodies I had heard whilst in the cosmos. I could hear them so clearly. I had my first Reddit livestream July 4th, 2021, with 389 views, and was very content with that. But I've set my goal to have at least 10,000 streams by Christmas. I practiced and trained as hard as I could, but of course it was difficult for me due to the left side stroke damage. I took advice from viewers every week about building my set, and by October 6th, 2021, I had hit 500,000 views. Now I have a following of people listening to me every week discussing death, dreams, and consciousness through music. I'm receiving messages every week from people telling me how I've helped them turn their life around, and how they've been able to contact their loved ones by receiving messages via Easter eggs and hidden signs from the beyond. We've also had moments where we've been able to talk people down from committing suicide by sharing love and energy in the chat. I wrote a song called Paralyzed for my friend Mallory right after she'd passed, and it's become a favourite for people to connect freely with friends or loved ones that they've lost. Now this is only the beginning, but I've just found out today that I've got COVID again, so I wanted to share my story with you. The 3 things in life that are the most important are perspective, energy, and to make sure you protect your subconscious at all times. This one is key. Each of my near-death experiences, or clear-death experiences, have taken me to different places depending on where my head was at the time. So please, please feed your subconscious mind at all costs, even if your friends don't understand. All of my friends have come around and now understand why I had to leave and isolate. But remember, no one will believe in your dreams as much as you. Thank you for listening, and I hope my words can help guide you through your journey. When you've seen what I've seen, heard what I've heard, read the writing on the wall, walked where I've walked, and climbed where I've climbed, when you've taken trips to the spring in fall, died like I've died, and been down that road on your hands and knees. I'm not here to boast, but the thing I know most is that I know nothing at all. I made a post yesterday and was able to remember some things that I've experienced at my step-grandparents' home in Vermont. They rarely go up there, and nobody generally visits, apart from a 2 to 5 day stay. Now whether you believe it or not, I'm able to sense spirits, and so is my stepdad. I can make out their general appearance and stature, general age, as well as how they feel towards me being there. My stepdad can do everything I mentioned too, plus being able to hear them talking to him clearly, but rarely seeing them. Now this property in Vermont is in a quaint, rural town. It's a fairly blue-collared yet refined environment, and is a nice and pleasant area. The house was once a tavern, easily identifiable by its incredibly thick separation doors, which quartered off the family space from the tavern itself. It's humble, but easy to tell that it was once teeming with people, and downstairs is generally peaceful. I haven't had any notable experiences there besides the apartment detached, and it's set apart from the main house, complete with a kitchen, bathroom, small living room and bedroom. There's a woman who stays around there, and although she is completely harmless, I can't help but feel extremely uncomfortable in her presence. Something about her is just off. However, upstairs is where things get interesting. Myself and my stepdad both find it difficult to go up there at any hour of the day, and the same applies for my mum, just based off what we tell her. The stairs, set at the front door, fork into 2 directions after around 7 steps. It's pretty steep and hard to see what's atop, but there's one thing that both my stepdad and I can agree on. Atop the stairs to the right of the fork stands a man, and he doesn't appreciate us being anywhere near him. He's dressed in some kind of maritime uniform, glares menacingly down upon us, and is young. He's clean and youthful, yet intolerant nonetheless. The best way I can describe it is that he wants to do us harm. That's largely why we don't go upstairs. Every time I look up those stairs, a sharp chill runs down my spine, as presumably this man is either guarding his family from us, tired of seeing strangers in his house, or a mixture of the two. Looking into the history of the place, the oldest son of one of the original owners passed away at sea, and he was a naval officer in the 1800s. It goes without saying that we leave him alone as much as we can, but it really creeps me out when my perceptions of spirits turn out to be almost pinpoint accurate. I know nothing about this man, yet I could practically see him without seeing him. There he was, standing, looking down on us with a despicable glare. Every time we go back, we make sure to stay completely within the old tavern space. The thick doors stay open, out of fear that they won't open again, but we make sure to try to step foot out of the family's old residence, since we really don't have any use for it anyway. Any and all suggestions would be appreciated. So I'm a 2-year medical student right now, and I live in Iran. My experience goes back to almost 4 years ago, I guess around 2018, and when I was in high school studying for my final exams in year 12. We have 2 houses which are right beside each other, one being bigger than the other, and my family and I live in both houses. The smaller of the 2 wasn't ours at first. We'd bought it from our dead neighbour's grandson after she'd passed away. I think she had heart problems, as we could always hear her screaming and crying in pain. The walls are very thin, so it's almost like 2 rooms in an apartment, and that's how 90% of the homes are in this country. This lady had also had some problems with her other family members, mostly the grandson, as he was addicted to drugs, so was getting into all sorts of trouble with the law. So a lot of the time, we would hear the cops coming to her house, which I think is what contributed to her illness. Anyway, after she'd died, we'd bought the house and made some changes to it, painting walls, adding more rooms, and also putting a door between the 2 houses so we could enter it without having to go outside. We'd made it somewhere for people to stay when they visited, but I used it to study as it was quiet. So as I said, this experience was during my exam days, when I used to study all night alone. I was there for around 3 or 4 nights before things got strange, and everything was generally fine, except for always feeling like something or someone was watching me, which made me paranoid and very uneasy. I'm not really in a good mental state either, because my mum divorced my dad and left me when I was 6, and my medical university and studies are adding to my anxiety. I stayed some nights in the house, until the night before an exam. I was having to read around 300 pages of BS, so I was starting to get frustrated. It was 3 to 4 a.m, and as I was reading, I heard some noises coming from the kitchen that sounded like the water filter. I didn't think anything of it, as we'd been using a water filter for years, so I was familiar with the sound. However, 5 to 10 minutes later, the sound became a little too much, and I realized that we hadn't put any water filters in. They're only in the other house. I thought instead then that maybe it was a leak or something, so I went to the kitchen and checked under the sink. But everything was okay and there was no sound. I then got some water from the fridge and went back to my book. But as soon as I began to read, the noises started up again. This time, though, it was almost like someone was knocking from under the sink. I was getting really annoyed now, as I was overtired and already frustrated. I started cussing out loud, and suddenly after I'd stopped, the sound got louder. I cussed a second time, and it got louder again. I did this 4 times, and each time the sounds and knockings got louder and louder. I didn't know what to do, and felt like I was in fight or flight mode. I thought I was going to have a heart attack, so I quickly got my book and ran to the other house where my family were all asleep. I managed to sleep for the rest of the night, as I was unable to concentrate on my study, I actually got a good result on my exam, and I told my family what had happened the next morning. But none of them believed me. They just said I watched too many horror movies, so they thought I was just making it all up. I'm 100% sure, though, that they've had strange experiences too, and they're just not telling me. For example, my grandma once told me she'd seen the stairway light turning on and off by itself, and she'd clearly heard the light switch being clicked. My aunt too has encountered strange things in the house. My dad bought a massage chair for my grandma a few years back, but she was always afraid of it for some reason, so she barely used it and now won't go anywhere near it. On one occasion when my aunt came to visit us, we gave her the room where the massage chair is, and she told me that during her first night, around midnight when she was trying to get to sleep, the chair began moving up and down like someone was on it trying to get a massage. She was so freaked out she couldn't move, and a few moments later it turned itself off and went back to its original position. Now, I'm not saying that this is definitely paranormal activity, as maybe it's just a malfunction within the chair itself, but I think it's certainly strange. It hasn't happened again since, that I know of at least, but maybe it's the old woman haunting the place, or something else like a demon or jinn as we call them here. Or maybe it was just an electrical or piping fault that we haven't found yet. I haven't slept or even stayed a night in that house in the last 4 years. This story dates back to 2014 to 2015, when I was 12 years old, and it was the first paranormal experience I'd ever had. I'm from India, and in the summer of 2014, I was on holiday at my grandparents' house. It's been the usual routine every summer that both their daughters, my mum and her sister, would come to visit them and stay for a couple of weeks. One day at around noon, I was watching a horror movie. It wasn't terrifying, but more intriguing. Once evening came, I was up on the terrace with my aunt, watering the plants, and I asked her a question. "You've lived here for so long. Have there been any paranormal happenings in this neighborhood?" She was hesitant to answer, but I insisted, so finally she began to talk. "You see the house that's exactly right of the house that's in front of us?" I nodded. "The people who lived there before had a history. Many years ago, there was a woman in that house who was possessed. We used to hear screams and demonic roars from her, and her eyes used to become blood red. She'd behave uncontrollably, and her voice used to change into something very raspy and heavy, and she began to attack people. Me, being a 12-year-old, got scared listening to the story, and asked her, 'It doesn't happen now, does it?' She confirmed that it had stopped happening 3 to 4 years ago, as her family had taken her to a sacred temple to get exorcised. I was actually relieved to hear that, but of course since then I was feeling a bit uneasy. Now at night we'd all sleep on the terrace, as the power supply went to shambles in the summer, so at night we all used to be up on the terrace playing board games. One night by 11 p.m, we'd finished playing and decided to all go to sleep. And by around 11:30 everything was silent. Only the wind and the sound of fluttering leaves could be heard. Just then we all heard a scream. It was a woman, and it was very loud and long. Those who were asleep woke up immediately, and I remember seeing the neighbours standing on their terraces, looking out to see where it was coming from, and it was that house. As the screaming stopped, then came a very demonic sound. Everybody was on their feet then, and all turned towards that house. It continued for about a minute, and it was saying something in a foreign language. Then it all just stopped abruptly. I, terrified, covered in goosebumps all over my body. Somehow we got through the night. I was terrified and covered in goosebumps all over. But somehow we got through the night, and I slept close to my grandfather, as he always had a thick wooden stick with him as he slept. The next morning I felt very uneasy, convinced something bad was about to happen that day. I spent it playing games and doing homework, but wasn't able to concentrate. I just wanted to get out of that place. When evening came, I received a phone call from my uncle, asking if I'd like to go to temple. It's a very sacred temple in northern India, and the idea of being close to a goddess made me agree, so he picked me up and we started our road trip. But the uneasiness didn't stop there. When we reached the temple, there was hardly anyone there, so my uncle asked me to get into the line whilst he put our bags in the cloakroom. He was about 40 meters away from me when I got into the line, when out of nowhere, it seemed like a lot more people had joined the line, and it had suddenly become crowded. I still don't remember if it was real or if it was a trick. Then I peeked through the people to look for my uncle, but he was nowhere to be seen. My eyes were shooting fountains of tears as I was being completely crushed by the hustle and bustle of the crowd, and felt like I was being squeezed. I didn't know where my uncle was, and I cried so much my jaw began to hurt. Nobody seemed to care that a 12-year-old child was distraught in this way. But then entered a person who I honestly think was an angel. It was a man at about 35 years of age, and he came over and covered his arms around me, lifting me up. He had the most reassuring, trustworthy face I've ever seen. Then he said, "Don't worry, kid. Nobody will hurt you now I'm here." The line started moving forward then, and it felt like he was protecting me against all the people pushing at me. Then just as I entered the temple itself, everything went quiet, except for the man's voice, and I felt at peace and completely calm in that moment. I bowed down then to the goddess statue. Then after a while, as I walked to the exit of the temple, I saw my uncle standing near the announcement booth. I ran towards him and hugged him with relief, and he was relieved to see me too. As I turned to see the man that had helped me, he was gone. It was like he'd vanished into thin air, and I was surprised to see that the crowd had reduced too. We decided to head back home, and after that experience, I've not felt the uneasiness I felt that night on the terrace since. This was my first paranormal experience. What do you think happened to me? Since 2006, my family and I have relocated to 3 different cities. All houses had this heavy energy, which I can't describe, but it was a negative energy, and I'd always thought it may have been because of the family drama and bad experiences. This may or may not be true, but I never let myself think too much of it, probably because I'd gotten used to it. Let's start with our first home from 2006 to 2011. Since I didn't have my own room, I slept on the floor by my parents' bed. And across from me was a door which led to a hallway that connected to both the living room and my brother's bedroom door. So I was able to see my brother's bed by simply looking over the door. One night I woke up and kept tossing and turning to try and get back to sleep. But after waking up, I didn't feel tired or felt the need to sleep. After multiple attempts, I ended up on my back facing the bedroom door, and I don't know why, but I decided to look over the door, where I saw a man in his maybe late 20s staring down at me from the outer part of the bedroom door. As my heart rate slowly increased, I kept telling myself that it was all in my head, or it was my brother. But when I looked, I saw my brother sleeping in his bed. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, opened them again, and the man was still staring down at me. His face wasn't clear, but I was able to see his evil grin, almost as if he was laughing at me, or a smile an evil person would have on his face after they defeated their enemy. I freaked out and froze, went under my blanket and fell back to sleep from fear, anxiety, and lack of oxygen due to heavy breathing. The next day I told my parents, and of course, like every parent, they said it must have been a nightmare. The second home we moved to towards the end of 2011 had 3 bedrooms, so I was able to have my own room. Earlier I mentioned the negative energy which I'd always felt in the first house, but this home had a negative energy only in my room. My mum never liked coming in there, and after multiple times of asking my mum why she didn't, she finally told me that my room felt extremely heavy and unwelcoming, saying something kept pushing her out. She admitted that she would only come to my room if she really had to, but otherwise she wouldn't come in. Just like the first house, I saw the evil guy again. I woke up in the middle of the night and saw him, but this time it was a little different. He was standing at the end of my bed, staring at me with that same evil, haunting smile, and as I was able to see what he was wearing, it was a thick striped long-sleeve shirt, and his face wasn't as blurred as before. After the second time of seeing him, I saw him a few more times, and he'd stopped visiting me. That is until a week ago. I was sitting on my bedside, petting my dog after he'd just come into my room. I'd left my door open all the way, so that my other dog could come in too, when I noticed my dog was staring at the door while I was petting him. I became curious and looked over, and saw that guy again. This time he was standing 4 steps below the starting point of the staircase by my room, and he was just staring at me. I looked away without thinking twice, and continued petting my dog and hugging him. And after a few seconds I turned around and he was gone. Judging by his clothes, height and face, I'm convinced that this was the same spirit that followed me from my first home to third, and I'm not really sure what he wants from me. I don't know what to do or who can help me, but I'm freaking out, and I want to put an end to this ASAP. Growing up, I, a 23-year-old female, have dealt with many paranormal experiences, from seeing my dead grandfather at his funeral, as well as my other grandpa any time I've almost died or had a seizure. My scariest encounters are between the negative entity that has been attached to me for the past 14 years, a haunted doll that I got from Goodwill, and shadow people. Now, while the doll is recent, the shadow people have started appearing again. Between 2011, when I was turning 12, to 2015, when I was turning 16, I was waking up every night to the attachment or shadow people. I stopped seeing the shadow people in 2016, but still had to deal with the attachment, whatever it was. The doll was something I'd bought in 2020, that for the past 2 years has plagued me with things flying off the walls and giving me nightmares. The attachment has left me alone for the most part, for now, but unfortunately that gave room for the return of the shadow people. The only way to describe them is one of them with no eyes gets up on top of me and pins me down. The 9 faceless but red-eyed ones surround my bed, and it terrifies me. My neurologist said they were hallucinations during sleep paralysis, but that doesn't explain the marks I would get, or the feeling of being drained when I wake up. It also doesn't explain my dog shivering with her head hidden under her blanket or pillow. But the thing is, I'd wake up with bruises, but by the next morning they were gone. Well, the ones on my arms anyway. The ones on my legs stay for weeks on end. And also during the return of the shadow people, I started getting lupus-like symptoms and sleeping all day. So much so that I was sent to be tested for it right after a doctor's appointment, and they are completely confused how my test came back negative, but I'm showing all the symptoms. They don't understand why I stop breathing at night, or have constant asthma attacks when I hadn't had them in years. I become weak, and some days like today, I experience it at night, so I'm struggling to stay awake and my body feels drained. It had been about a week without attacks before last night, and I was feeling good. But now I'm really struggling. My joints hurt, and I have a horrible headache. And last night after the attack, I was also left drenched in sweat, to the point where my blanket and pillows were damp. I felt like I had sat outside in the sun for hours, and I even had a rash all over my entire body. The effects are slowly getting worse now, changing from allergic reactions to feeling drained, and occasionally both. But the scariest thing is, when I wake up from not being able to breathe, then having an asthma attack almost every night. I know these could be coincidences, but all the tests they're running come back negative, with all the symptoms still persisting. My lungs are good, lupus is negative, sleep apnea is negative, and I spent over $300 on my co-pay card for my sleep test to come back normal. We've eliminated stuff I'm allergic to, and I've cut back on how much I go outside, which was at my doctor's request. And it makes me really sad because I love my garden. I even wear a different brand mask because maybe that was an issue. I went back to using no fragrance stuff and special soap that I use because of having allergic reactions to detergents. I even switched to fragrance-free wash for my dogs and my deodorant. But it doesn't explain why, despite going through all these steps, I'm having no relief. Even with medication like prednisone, nebulizers and inhalers, is it possible that these shadow people are causing all these issues? They did start specifically when they began to appear to me, and they are the exact same from my childhood that tortured me. Although I will say, it's like they don't want anyone else to see them, because the few times I've managed to scream or make a sound, or the moment my best friend opens the door, they're gone and I'm free. She's also the only other person who has seen bruises on me, which once again confirms that this is really happening. She's been with me, and I will be in her room when she's watched a bruise suddenly appear. It won't be there when I enter the room, but suddenly one will appear, and she's the only one that believes me about the shadow people, as she's seen me terrified in my bed and has had to hold me whilst I clutch to her in fear. I also want to mention that I've been to a psychologist and been cleared of mental illness that could cause hallucinations such as schizophrenia, which my great-grandma and mum have both had. I am diagnosed with anxiety, depression, and complex PTSD, which yes, could cause me to see things, but that's more flashbacks, auditory sensitivity, and disassociating, as well as freezing up in certain situations. I get occasional paranoia too, but that's mainly around new people. Hallucinations are not something I suffer from. This happened during my first year of college, and it was at an old Catholic school and seminary that was founded in 1808. It had been used as a makeshift hospital for both sides during the Civil War, and is reportedly haunted, with many articles being written about it. But I didn't know much about it then, other than kids talking about how the campus was haunted. Then late one night, around 1 or 2 in the morning, I was outside my dorm alone, smoking a cigarette. The campus was known for having a colony of feral cats that the students would feed, and I love cats, so I would keep an eye out for them. To set the scene, the building was directly behind me, and I was about 5 to 10 feet from the entrance. In front of me there was grass for about 20 feet, then a row of hedges, and beyond that the road. So I was just standing there chilling and smoking my cigarette, when I saw a black cat emerge from the bushes. It was dark, but there were streetlights illuminating everything. So I got excited, because as I mentioned, I love cats, and it was walking directly towards me, so I was hoping to give it some pats. Now I'm not exactly sure how to describe this next part, but I'll definitely do my best. As the cat was emerging from the bushes, it was like the blackness of the fur kept going up until it was no longer a cat, but a figure in a black cloak. This sounds so crazy, but it was what I saw. I was terrified, but also incredibly curious, and I didn't want to stop looking at it, but at the same time, something felt very, very wrong. What got me going was that it was slowly getting closer, and it never stopped moving. I snapped out of it, threw my cigarette down and bolted for the door with my key card, but it wasn't letting me in. As I was fumbling with it, I looked back, and the figure was closer to me. Then the door finally opened, and I booked it up the stairs to my room. I was completely sober, as I didn't indulge in anything back then besides cigarettes, and I was used to staying up late, so I don't recall being sleep deprived. But it was one of the strangest things that's ever happened to me, and I stopped telling people because no one believed me. Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed my video. And if you did, could you please give me virtual hugs by subscribing and clicking that notifications button. I also have a Patreon page and YouTube channel membership if you'd like to support me further. Thank you again for being here. Keep being creepy.